taking care of yourself, that would be something that I would tell myself to, be careful. Yeah. Guard your time and use it wisely. And don't be afraid to reach out for help. Cause like you said before about it taking a village, right? Like everyone's trying to do everything themselves. It's just, we see the people who are most successful, they have a good read on what they can outsource and what they can do.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Pranzata Podcast. This is your host, Andrea Pranzatelli. This is episode number 110 on the Pranzata Podcast on YouTube. We have a new guest today. This is Tom Brislin. Tom Brislin is a musician, keyboardist. He is a songwriter, and he's also the current keyboard player for the rock band Kansas. I have a lot of questions for Tom today. Before we get into it, if you are new to this channel, please don't forget to hit subscribe. It is my mission to grow this channel this year, and your support would be incredibly helpful. Also, before we get into it, it is my vision to have this to be a community podcast. So anything you want to put your input on, whether you agree, disagree with anything we talk about, please drop it in the comment section below. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Okay, so Tom, my first question for you. Kansas is currently on its 50th anniversary tour. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
That's amazing. I would imagine being on a tour so big, it's probably a wild experience. It's definitely not the typical human experience. So my question for you is, have you gained any new perspective shift or insight or learned anything about being on tour that has changed the way you view the world or anything like that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the way Kansas tours is a bit different than previous tours of this type that I've done. When my first big world touring experience was with Meatloaf as his piano player. And that was like kind of, I was playing clubs with my indie band here in New Jersey, New York, Philadelphia, et cetera. And then I got the call to play with Meatloaf. I was like 24 years old. And the first gig was on TV. It was VH1 Storytellers. And that was like trial by fire,
Yeah.
I'd thrown right into it. And then you just had to get on with it. And the next thing you know, we were playing theaters in the US and Canada and arenas in Europe.
Right.
And we were on the tour bus. And so I got that whole experience as part of the foundation.
Wow.
For what I did. And from there, I went to tour with Yes, similar situation. And because of that exposure to classic rock and progressive rock, that's where some of these other groups have found me over the years. But it's never linear, it's never like, oh, you make it and you're on a tour bus. Now you stay. No, it goes up and down and up and down. And so after the first Meatloaf tour I did, my band Spiraling, we hopped in a van and crisscrossed the country opening for They Might Be Giants. And it was like, we had all of our belongings in one, minivan. and stuff and no crew and just cramming into a hotel room or some friend's house or something like that. And then after that, something more plush comes along, and then you go back roughing it. With Kansas, we don't live on a tour bus. We actually fly out ahead of the weekend, play a venue in city A, drive to city B, play that show, and then fly home. So we're averaging about 2 concerts a week, but we also get to be home every week. So you get kind of the best of both worlds.
Right.
But what that also means is that we're kind of touring continuously throughout the year.
Gotcha.
So it's not like you're on a tour for a month or 2 or 3, and then you're home for X amount of time. Like, we do have some breaks, but it's a little bit more continuous lifestyle.
Yeah. All right. So that actually perfectly segues to my next question. I've interviewed a lot of stand-up comedians on this podcast, and they go on tour as well. And I hear it almost feels like there's 2 camps of perspectives I hear about touring as a comedian. You have one camp that says they love touring, but it's not sustainable. Maybe financially it's sustainable, but mentally, physically, they're like, I can't do this forever. I have to have a shelf life date on touring. But then there's like this other camp of comedians I've noticed that are like, it's exhausting, but I couldn't live life any other way. I could do this till the day I die. Where do you stand with that? Can you live this lifestyle forever? Or is it something that you're like, it's exhausting?
I think both things can be true, right?
Yeah.
I guess, well, I'm not exhausted. I mean, especially after, paying the dues that I paid and seeing what it could possibly entail to do a tour. Like, I'm very fortunate. We have a great crew, and the band makes it um, as comfortable as they can make it while getting the job done.
Yeah.
Because the veterans in this band are in their 70s, and so they don't need to rough it.
Yeah.
But it's not extravagant. It's practical, but it's comfortable. It's humane. You actually treated humanly. So, but to your point, humans can get used to a lot of things, can't they? Right?
Right. Yeah.
Like
Very
we can get
adaptable.
used, and after a while, the touring life is the new normal. That's what starts to make sense to me. And if I'm home for too long and not checking into a hotel or not having my script of what I'm going to be doing, handed to me, then that's the adjustment.
Yeah.
Being home for a while. And I think that might relate to the people you spoke to who said, oh, I couldn't have it any other way.
Yeah. It's funny. You said about like the planes and like constantly being in and out of planes. A lot of stand-up comedians, it's like known in the comedy community that a lot of comics have so many bits about airplanes because after a while that becomes like traveling becomes such a normal part of the reality. So it's kind of like a thing in comedy where it's like, why do so many comedians have bits about the planes? You know what I mean? It's just what they see. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a central and ludicrous part of the life experience because you just see so many bizarre slices of life. And I think about those stand-up bits when I'm on a plane. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this so-and-so said that, and this is it in real life.
Is there any way to get productivity done on the plane? Like, do you do any music writing or listening on your, I want to say iPod, but like that's so outdated, but listening on your headset? Like, is there anything like that? Or do you kind of just totally relax on the plane?
Quick aside, I found my iPod. It's 20 years old. It still works.
Well, then I
never thought I'd see the day where I'd have nostalgia for that because that was representing the end of my other lifestyle, collecting CDs, and before that tape and records. But anyway, it's funny you mention that because I think about that and that it's easier to be productive with the tech that we have than any other time. But I don't find myself doing it as much. I just try to like get the headspace on a plane. And also privacy is a thing. I don't want people looking at what, I don't want to be that guy, like, check me out with my music production. I'm such a music producer. Look at me, and my Logic Pro screen is so big. And, so it's like, I don't know, I don't know, maybe I'm just projecting, but in the days before, like, computers were able to handle the type of music production that we have now. I remember on the Meatloaf tour, I was like, I'm going to make the most of every minute. Yeah. And I got this thing. It was this Yamaha QY70. It was a music sequencer, had sounds in it, and a little MIDI port. It's about the size, I was going to say like a VHS tape. Like anybody knows what that is anymore. But it was like I had the headphones. I even had a little MIDI keyboard out, and I was like, this is great. I'm going to be so productive. And now it's like you could produce an entire album on your phone.
Yeah.
And it's right there. And, but actually it's at the airports, if there's like a layover or a long time, like I'll find a corner to work in and I'll do some music. Writing lyrics is something that I could be doing anywhere, anytime.
Yeah.
So that's happened in the Uber or on plane or at the airport or whatever. Yeah. I mean, it's like part of being a songwriter is just to be always aware and listening and receptive to what's going on around you, because then that's when the ideas come.
It's funny you said about the little Yamaha. I do the same thing, but mine's bigger than it because it's a modern technology, but it's like the Yamaha Reface. Do you know the Yamaha Reface?
Oh yeah, I know which one you have. It's super popular. I was thinking of picking that one up. That's like the most popular one. It's got the Fender Rhodes piano and a good piano. It's got like the meat and potatoes.
Yeah, and it's like they make like I think 4 or 5 different ones with different sounds. Like there's just an organ one, just a synth one. I have the one with the piano sound in it and like the more basic sounds. They randomly have like a toy sound, which I'm like, that's like an interesting choice since there's only 6 sounds on the piano. But no, it's great. It's £5, and I was that person that you talked about, like that obnoxious person. I brought my little Yamaha Reface to the airport, and I was sitting there and like practicing for a gig. But that was the only time I ever did it because I felt that exact same way. I'm like, this looks so arrogant right now. Like,
Well, I mean, I guess when it really comes down to it, you just gotta, we can't really worry too much about what people are thinking of us. You just have to, if you have a goal and it's something that you want to do, I mean, you're not hurting anybody, right?
It's true.
So I do bring a MIDI keyboard for the hotel room, and I set things up. And sometimes it's the best laid plans too. I'm like, I got my whole setup going, and next thing you know, it's like, where did all the time go? We got the show, we got to check out and get to the next place, and so it's finding time in the cracks is always the quest.
Yeah, no. Okay, moving on to the next question. All right. As a musician, I felt like I noticed a level of maturity in becoming a musician when I started opening my mind to different genres. When I was a teenager, I strictly liked punk rock and classic rock, and everything else was conforming to the system. As I got older, I realized a lot of the music I liked, especially in some of the punk songs, were actually pretty bad. And not knocking that style either. I'm just saying, as I've grown older, I've really opened my mind to different genres, even pop music, even stuff that's conformist or whatever you want to call it. How has that been for you? When you were a teenager or younger, first listening to music, were you like, I'm a metalhead, or did you have like anything that you liked?
There were definite things that I gravitated to.
Yeah.
The synth rock in the 80s, the progressive rock of the 70s was sort of like always kind of looming. And I got really into that as a teenager. And I never thought I'd be making my living doing it.
Wow.
Next thing you know, I'm touring with Yes, I'm touring with Kansas. The Kansas is pretty progressive when you really listen to their albums. It's a lot more than the Wind.
Yeah.
And so early on, one thing about me, and this is strange, I don't know how to explain it, but I've always had a really clear sense of purpose in life. Like, I've been trying to form bands since I was 10 years old. And from around the age 12 to now, I've had like a steady trajectory of bands or artists or projects or something. I've always been going for it. And I say that because along the way, I was exposed to jazz in high school. I was exposed to, and then I had friends who were into synths like I was, and they were into all like techno pop and electronic music. So I was getting into that. I was taking classical piano lessons, and I was into that. So it was like I had that smorgasbord of everything going on, and then I became really an admirer of Herbie Hancock. And in interviews with him and also in his body of work, you see that it's super versatile. And when he said, he's like, I've always strived to be a versatile musician. And that became like kind of the rallying cry for me, like almost the mantra, like I wanted to be a versatile musician. And being a professional musician, you also had to be versatile because, when the phone rang and it was a wedding or a street fair or an art gallery or a rock club or, a party, it was like, I wanted to make a living as a musician, and I wanted to take every gig I could. Yeah. It was like the bat phone rang, and I slid down the pole to the Batmobile at the gig. And on the break in the gig, I was listening to the radio, thinking about what other songs I could learn or something like that. So really checking out a lot of styles was always my thing.
For me, it was teaching that opened my mind up because me having that perspective when I was a teenager, that only hindered me as a musician as I got older. Because like you said, having this eclectic taste or just exposure to different styles of music only makes you a better player. But for me, it was teaching that opened my mind because, I would have students come in and want to learn songs that they liked, and I had to teach it to them. So after breaking it down analytically and being able to teach it to them, I would be like, wait a second, I actually like this is pretty cool what they did. Like one of them was people shame me for saying this, but I used to hate the song Shut Up and Dance With Me. I couldn't stand it. Then after learning the keyboard part, I actually ended up falling in love with the song. I was like, I hated this, but I actually really like this now. It's interesting.
Yeah, some of the pop nuggets have like little quirks about them that you only really come to appreciate when you look under the hood and you start to analyze them or learn how to play them. I found that too.
Yeah, no, definitely. All right. My next question for you. I can relate to this. I'm wondering how you are with this. Has there ever been a point in your musical career where you felt like you had to make a sacrifice of money and financial stability for the pursuit of your career? And if so, do you care to elaborate on how that's been for you?
Most definitely. And I don't know if I've ever talked about this in public,
You
but
don't have to, whatever you feel
no,
comfortable.
no, no. It's not like it's a secret. It's actually, if you look at my career, you can see what happened. So I mentioned that at the age 24, I got to tour the world with Meatloaf.
Yeah.
And but he was also doing movies at the time. He was in Fight Club. He was in Crazy in Alabama. He was an actor as well as a musician. So he wasn't touring year round.
Yeah.
Furthermore, legacy artists, you don't know what their album recording schedule is, but there was no guarantee that we'd be in on that side of the game too. So I give you that background to show you that. So it wasn't like I turned every other musical thing off and just was like Meatloaf's keyboard player. It was like there were all these gaps, and I had my own band at the time. It was called You Were Spiraling in the late '90s, and we were striving. We were. We came close to getting a record deal, that whole thing. We had some offers, we had some demo deals, but nothing that ever fit. But I was determined because my real dream was to create original music of my own. And playing with such a big artist was, I certainly saw the opportunity in that, and that it was a rare opportunity.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun, but I knew that it wasn't going to be the thing I would just do full time for the rest of my musical career. Some people do get into that line of thing. They're touring musicians. They go and they look for tours, and they want to be on the road continuously with other acts. But I was like, I'm doing my music. Then when Yes called, I mean, that was in 2001. Okay. And I was like, I had to sacrifice being Meatloaf's keyboard player to do Yes's gig. And I knew that the Yes gig would only be for 1 year. They told me in advance, this is just for 1 year. And so it was like, I had to sacrifice that other position in order to do this thing, because Yes was the band. I had the posters on the wall. I learned their music in high school, Battle of the Bands, all that stuff. I was so into them, and the fact that it seemed like virtual reality that I was going to get to play with my favorite childhood band, and so I had to go for it. But I knew that at the end of it, I wasn't going to try to jump into another tour. I was going to I actually put most of my earnings from those bands into my band. I financed the recordings. I got us a van when we needed to tour and stuff like that. So after the Yes thing, I could have rode that to more pro touring opportunities and been like a good job. But I was like, I have to give it a shot with my band, because I'm going to look back and regret it if I said, what would have happened if I really put myself out there? So we did. And we sold a few thousand albums of our own that we produced ourselves, and we toured coast to coast. We even went to Japan once, but it was like we didn't become household names. This was in the 2000s when rock was kind of going down and music sales were going down. Like the digital revolution was happening, and so many things were changing in the music world. And what I would explain to some people is that when you tour as an indie band, it's almost like you're on a political campaign. Like you're spending money to get the vote. You're spending money to get the fan.
Yeah.
You're not making money. So I passed up more lucrative paths to pursue my own music. And I'm fortunate to be where I am now because, that didn't, spiraling, it ran its course. We stopped playing around 2008. And I moved to Nashville the first time to fill a house with instruments and make a solo album, which was on my bucket list. And I'm glad I did that, because that was something that I really, in my heart, wanted to do the way, on my terms.
I have a very similar experience, like personally as well. It's hard. And it's one of those things that everyone around you calls you crazy when they see you like that. They're like, come on, like, what are you doing? So I kind of learned to tune all that out. But I didn't start pursuing music till I was in my 20s. I didn't start really getting into music till I was 23 or 24, which is very late. Like the idea of having a music career starting at that age is pretty unlikely. So what I knew then and there was like, I have to put in my 10,000 hours and I have to do it fast. And mind you, a lot of my friends, like people my age, they were making financial decisions for their future, like getting ready to buy a house, doing all these things, 9 to 5 jobs. And my my financial situation was a disaster. I mean, like things were broken all around me. I couldn't replace them. It was horrible. But it was one of those things where it was like I just knew in my heart I had to take that risk and have faith that the money will come later. And I did it. And there were definitely like times along that path where I was like, shit, am I screwing up? Like, am I ruining my whole life? But in hindsight, I'm like, no, you did the right thing because you wouldn't. I've reached a point in my piano skills where I can now do things more for money and my skills have a solid enough foundation that I don't have to do that. But I don't regret doing that at all, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you said like 23, 24, you were like, I'm too late. Because I remember when my band wasn't signed by the time I was 24, I thought, oh, well, I guess it's over. and my career is going better now than it ever has. But it's like, I'm not saying that to boast, but I'm saying it's like, the rules are just exploded, now. And there's so many ways to forge your path and to find your path, that I don't think you can say, oh, there's like like an age where it's not
No.
viable.
No, especially with the age of the internet, I feel like that's kind of given freedom back to the people because there might have been a time where like, especially as a female, like I might have had to been this like sexualized Mickey Mouse girl, like Britney Spears, like one of those types of people. And then unfortunately, as a woman, that does have a shelf life. Like, you know what I mean? Like by the age of 40, you go through menopause, whatnot. I feel like now there isn't so much ageism that way in music. Like, I think you can become successful at any age now. I have seen people pop off in their 40s, 50s, even 60s. And same is true for stand-up comedy as well. Even more so with comedy, because I don't feel like there's like you can look, as long as you're funny, you can look however you want and be as old as you want on stage. But even music, I feel like the internet has really opened up possibilities for people in that way.
Yeah, because you can find your tribe, you find your audience. It's just a little harder. Now, if you wanted to be, signed to a major label management and then make you think that you're rich, yeah, like you got to be this like sexualized kid practically. Yeah. But going direct into the world and just going directly to find your audience, I think it's harder work, but it allows you to be yourself.
Yeah. And then also, I think back to some of my musical idols, and they weren't really like some of the female ones weren't really so hypersexualized. Like Nina Simone comes to mind. She was a beautiful woman. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying she really was a natural. She had her own look. She didn't look like the sexualized stuff you would see on TV. So I'm like, no, as long as the music's like really there, you can find a path and a way in this.
It's interesting. If I may, I was thinking about like when I was a kid watching MTV in the 80s. And like, because I just watched that We Are the World documentary on Netflix, The Greatest Night in Pop, and I'm thinking about all those singers in the 80s and thinking about Cyndi Lauper, who, when I toured with Debbie Harry, we did a tour with her in 2007, and she was great. She was just fantastic. And I just saw her talent, but she was not the sexualized pop star. It was like Madonna kind of cornered that. And it was like usually the people in the dance genres were rocking that more vibe. But I just remember thinking like hit songs of the day, yes, the MTV era was definitely more visual and it was getting more shallow. But look, you had Tracy Chapman with hit songs. You had Suzanne Vega and other Indigo Girls. I mean, meaningful music.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't just about the personality as product. It was something more substantial, and we still liked the music. I think over time it just became like about the complete entertainment experience. So I mean, how frustrating it is that so many people listen to music with their eyes.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I'm always going for the ears.
One of my friends, like he's not a musician. He was commenting on Fred Durst. I think Fred Durst made a new album and he was like, come on, man, it's over. And I was like, listen, I was like, I don't agree with that. Like some people do have that mentality of like, it's over, but I don't buy it,
Yeah. What does it mean to be washed up? Right. I mean, if you still got it, Look, I was fortunate to play. Um,
Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh. The thumbs up button just like randomly showed up on
yeah,
your
I was
screen.
like, oh, well, someone approves of our notion here, right? Yeah. Well, so I think that I was privileged and fortunate to when I joined Kansas was that they let me into the whole picture as a band member. So I was writing with them too, and we were making an album called The Absence of Presence, which came out during the pandemic in 2020.
Yeah.
And we're really proud of that album. I think it's a strong rock album in their genre. And, like I said, these guys, only a few of the original members are still in the band, but that's okay because they've had a lineage. It's always been about the music. And who's to say they shouldn't anymore? Now, will classic rock radio play it? No, Sirius XM will on their, specialty channels. But this is something that I've seen happen to these rock acts that I've played with over the years. Like, who is to say that you should stop doing what you want to do if you could still do it? Like, what gives them the right?
Yeah.
If nobody buys it, then nobody buys it. But if it still makes people happy, then go for it.
Yeah, no, 100%. Okay, my next question. This is one that you absolutely don't have to answer this or say pass if it's too personal of a question. But going along with making sacrifices, as a woman, especially, I feel the pain of this. I did feel like at some point I felt like I had to choose between family or career. I find that it's very hard to balance relationships, romantic relationships as a musician. Never mind the idea of having kids. I'm not saying that I never will have kids, but a lot of my friends are already getting married and having kids, and I've been very resistant to follow down that path because I'm not sure. Have you ever reached a point in your career where you felt like you had to choose between a path of a family or your career, or is that not something you've ever felt the pressure of?
Going through the process of like striving to be a successful solo artist or in my band, there definitely were sacrifices of the personal nature as well, because how it is. It's all consuming, the music thing, especially if you want to be really good. You have to put in so much time. And like you said, the travel, the nature of being on the road, it's not for everyone. So there have been times when I could have just gone like with a more conventional life. And I did miss out on some really quality relationships, which I regret and sometimes write songs about. Nowadays, I found a way to strike the balance. Because again, I think like in the there's so much more talk about self-care and taking care of yourself now, and even as a musician. And I wish that this had been brought to the attention of musicians years ago, because we might still have some of our favorites with us who we've lost to the trappings or what that life had done to them. So the short answer is I've had to make sacrifices, but also it's been a pursuit of trying to find the way to truly be yourself and truly experience that full breadth of life that you want to.
Yeah, no, as a female, this is like a really hard one, especially because, there's biological factors in me saying like, it's time to have a kid, but at my heart, at the core of it, I know that I would resent having and that's not right. Like, I don't want to bring a child to this world and be resentful towards them that I had to stop living the way I wanted to live. So that's not to say I'll never have kids, but I'm just kind of following my intuition. And right now I'm saying, if I ever have them, I don't want them right now. And that's all I could say. If there ever comes a time where it feels right to have them, I will. But now I'm just like, it's not. It's harder for a woman because there's an end date to that, my body can't have kids forever. But then again, there's always, God knows what's going to be possible with the technology. Maybe women will be getting pregnant in their 60s, like within the next 20 years, but you just never know,
I mean, the questions that you have to ask yourself about, how is it possible for me to have this and both be thriving? Is the creative question.
Yeah.
And there may be a way, or it might be either or, depending on what you want, right?
Yeah.
So I know people that have made the balance happen. I haven't really picked their brains too much, but I know it's not easy, but they,
Yeah.
they but plenty of musicians I've worked with have managed somehow to, men and women, have been able to strike that balance between career and family.
Yeah, I mean, like the only way I could see it happening is if I'm so filthy rich that I could have a babysitter at all times, or if I somehow have a husband who's like the stay-at-home dad. Like that's the only way it would work for me. So that's why I said I'm like, I'm not, I know what I want right now. So like I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing now. And if something like that in the future presents itself, then I'll think about it. But in the moment, I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, money sure makes a difference.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I like again, there are like celebrities and stuff like who have are able to have kids because they have the financial resources to um get people involved. Like what's the it takes a village to raise a child. They can pay for their village. Um
Mhm.
okay, next question. Okay, this one's about music theory. Do you feel that having a deep understanding of music theory is the key to being good at improvising? Or do you think it's just one of those things that you got it or you don't, or like maybe a combination of these two?
Ooh, because that then we get to the question, that you got it or you don't. That goes to the talent question,
Yeah.
which has always been a dicey topic in
Mm.
my life. Because like you, I was a teacher as well. I taught piano for many years. I went to India 10 years ago to teach at a music college. And I was always, even before all this, I was always the one that wanted all my friends to join in my dream with me.
Yeah.
And there were certain aptitudes that I had that not everybody had, like perfect pitch and the ability to pick things up by ear or the ability to create things. So there was something that I had, but it has to be nurtured. You can't just say, "Oh, well, I'm sure you've heard people say, "Oh, I'd do anything to play like you." It's like, no, you wouldn't, because if you could, you would
Yeah.
practice. I sacrificed a lot of social life in college to be in the practice room four
Me
hours a
too.
day.
Me too.
Yeah, so it was like, you talk about the sacrifices. So I know that I had some talent, and I always was so weary of using that word because I didn't want people to get discouraged, and I always want everybody to at least give it a shot to see what would happen if you really put in the time and
Yeah.
and did things in a dedicated fashion.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and I'm going to get to the main point, I promise. But so the talent question, that's like a philosophical question,
Yeah.
but I think there is a spark inside, because I know some amazing musicians, but they don't desire to improvise,
Right.
and others that don't desire to play anything the same twice. So the desire is a fuel in all of that, and theory is tool. It's not the. I always used to say that it's not the rule. It's a tool. And so, because there's two sides to theory. There's the, how do we explain what just happened musically in a way that we can talk to each other about it, or what are some building blocks that we can use to generate ideas or to get ourselves out of a stuck spot.
Yeah. No, theory, that's so funny you put it that way about the communication, because that was a big thing for me. Because I had a good ear before I started learning music theory. And to me, it was just like putting names on stuff that I had already heard. Like when I first heard like the word like dominant seven, like when I heard that, I'm like, oh, that thing. I know what that is. Like I just didn't know what it was called. But so to me, it was very much like, at the very least, if it doesn't help you improvise, it helps you communicate with your bandmates. Like, hey, play this dot, like, because you'll have that one or two like bandmates that are like, wait, can you show me it? Like, and they'll be able to play it back. But you can definitely get work done a lot more effectively when you're just like, hey, dominant seven, and they know what you're talking about.
Speaking the language helps. And I will
Yeah.
say that throughout my career, from the earliest bands to present, I've always worked with musicians, some who have had theoretical instruction, and some who originated in garage bands and learned their instruments by themselves or had a friend teach them or something, very informally. So even at the highest levels, you have people who who don't speak that language, and some that do, and some that teach different. Like, look, I mean, jazz education has only really been around at the college level around 50 years, if you think,
Yeah.
which is, I guess that some people could say it's a long time, but compared to like classical music instruction or many other subjects that they teach in college, and not everybody agreed on how to how to notate things or how the nomenclature or whatever. So I went to William Patterson University, really highly rated jazz studies department, which started in the 70s. And some of the ways that we were taught to describe things or to label things or whatever that are in music, types of harmony and melodies, etc., I found that were a little bit different than, say, if you went to like Berklee College of Music. So there still is no definitive one way of talking about music theory that everyone can agree on. And this is just the Western world. If you get into traditional music from other countries around the world, it's an entirely different ball game.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I taught in India, I was teaching harmony, college level harmony. The classical music of India has no harmony. So it became a philosophy class. It was like,
right. Yeah.
Why have harmony?
No, now that there's a lot that just like popped up in my head about that, like so many like memories from music college. Now that you mentioned that, I remember I had this one like pretty strict music history professor, and he was like very classical, very by the books. I think he played like the upright bass is what his main instrument was. And I remember I learned this at the time I was studying jazz on the side along with my classical studies. And I learned in the jazz world that sometimes you call the circle of fifths the circle of fourths backwards. Like, that's a thing, right? And I had learned that. And then I had brought something up in class about the circle of fourths. And then the teacher was like, there is no such thing as the circle of fourths. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, I heard here that it's the circle of fourths. I heard here it's only the circle of fifths. What the hell? And I guess it depends like which world you're in, but that's like an example of these are all just words for concepts. Like conceptually, there is a circle of fourths because in jazz you often go to the fourth. Like so you're right. There is no like rule about this.
Yeah, there are some things that I teach, the way I teach about harmony and music, otherwise, that I'm certain would make the monocle fall out of the eye of some of the learned professors or whatever. They were like, what are you talking about? But I know it. It's like I'm taking the express to, I'm just trying to get people in the pool. If they want to look at things deeper, they can, and I'm not spreading misinformation. I'm just sort of everyone, when it comes down to it, you will have your own conception of music in your head. I've played with musicians who couldn't tell me the names of the notes they're playing. And they're some of my favorite musicians to play with.
Right.
I've worked with people with doctorates in music who are a drag to work with,
right.
And vice versa. I've worked with people who, man, if they just would learn a little bit more, like we could do so much more.
Yeah.
We were there were limits that we would hit that, and it wasn't like, oh, you just need to know the names of it, but the communication would break down.
Yeah.
And it's like, again, it's why use like a little broken screwdriver when you can use this power drill? You know what I mean? So it's like sometimes it would be nice to have that little extra advantage. But I know a lot of musicians were afraid to learn music, like take lessons or learn theory or anything, because they were afraid it was going to spoil the magic. And I am guilty of this with lyrics. I never wanted to take a course or read a book in lyric writing because I thought they would be putting words into my mouth. And I couldn't have been more wrong, because I started checking out some of these authors of writing better lyrics and other types of ways, especially when I moved to Nashville, which was like a lyrics first town in terms of songwriting. I'd meet the songwriters. I would be thinking about the lyrics first. And I came from a rock background where there was the sound of the band was like kind of the first and foremost thing. I cared about lyrics, but this was a new level. And what I realized was that some of these exercises that, songwriting courses or tips or whatever would have, they were really just ways to sort of build the vocabulary muscle, or to build the rhyming muscle, or to build the creativity muscle. It was a way, and once I kind of took some advice I found that I was able to express myself clearer and say what I wanted to say in a way that stood the test of time longer. My album is over 10 years old, and I listen back and, because earlier stuff, I would cringe at a line that I wrote. Like, I was like, oh man, I could have done better on that lyric. I thought I was really clever, but it was a little corny or whatever. Like, I stand by all my lyrics now. And I was listening because I went through the agony of going, nope, nope, no. I was like, I know I can beat it. I know I can be more effective.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking, well, how would you define what a better lyric is? It was like something that more effectively got the point across or painted a better picture.
Right. Yeah. Going back to what you said about how you felt that taking lessons would hinder your creativity. There's also like a pretty parallel thing in stand-up comedy where a lot of comedians say that they're afraid that getting sober, getting sober of like alcohol or drug addiction would hinder their creativity and they wouldn't be funny anymore. Because like there's a lot of mental health issues, addiction issues in comedy. And same thing, a lot of them had cleaned up and they only found that the ones who had cleaned up had reported back that it only helped them be more versatile and better in their career, because it forced them to get creative in different ways. Like, doing clean comedy, for example, like writing a bit without any curse words or anything like that. If you can accomplish that and get a lot of laughs, like that's very skilled. So, shifting your mind, I don't think it, like, I understand the fear, but I definitely don't think it can only give you a new perspective and make you better, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, in the spiraling days, most of my songs were these heartbroken tunes, and there was a joke. We had a manager once who half jokingly said, I hope you don't get a nice stable relationship because I want to hear all these, anguished songs. And I'm like, I don't want to die for this, and like you talk about the comedians, like, we see comedians that are no longer with us and musicians that are no longer with us. And I'm sure their loved ones would sure love to have them around if they didn't destroy themselves.
Yeah.
And gotten the support that they needed and not felt like I don't have them, I don't really have the magic unless I have this.
Yeah. And you can also have different phases. You can have like, okay, that was the down phase, and now this is the clean phase. Like, and it can all be beautiful. It doesn't have to be like, well, one's good and one is bad. Okay, I only have one more question for you. I'm not going to hold you hostage for too much longer. My last question for you. This is just a kind of a philosophical question about anything. It's doesn't even have to be related to music. It could be. But I pretty much ask everybody this question. I just like it. If you could give your younger self advice that you wish you knew now, that you felt could help you be on the correct path for you, what would you tell your younger self? I feel like you already kind of like had strong instincts as a younger person, it seems, but is there anything that you can speak of about this?
Yeah, with hindsight being 2020, I think don't try to do everything yourself. It's DIY, not DEY. And I still have to learn that because you get that thing where like, well, no one's going to write my bio. I better write my bio. Oh, I better update my website. I better write a newsletter. All these like peripheral things. Or, in the case of when I had the rock band, it was, well, we got to showcase. We got to keep building the following. And then there were like all these contradictory pieces of advice. Like, no, you should stay in and just write until you write a hit song. Get your song, and you're sure like, well, I'll just do everything. We'll make an album, we'll play gigs, we'll try to hustle and get a bigger audience. And these were before the days that social media gave us those instant numbers that we could see. It was like the only metrics was how many people showed up to your club or to your gig. And so I tried to do everything, and that included like, well, I'm gonna buy a house for the band to rehearse in, and I'm gonna, I bought too much house. I'm gonna flip a house so I can have some money to put into my thing. All these bright ideas. You think you can just do everything, and there's something to be said for focus.
That's really funny. Like you say that about the house, because a lot of my friends around me are getting houses, and it's obviously a smart financial decision to get a house. Like you're putting money into something that's going to be of a beneficial for you in the long run. You're not just throwing money away towards a rent. But then I'm thinking about it. I'm like, there's also a very valuable asset called your time. And unfortunately, while houses are a great benefit financially, they should be, at least. I don't really know. They're not necessarily a time benefit, because you got to fix the things, you got to, like, there's a lot of things you got to do when you own a house. And then if you move, like, let's say you get some type of career opportunity where you need to move across the country, granted, you can sell the house, but that could also be a time management thing. So for me, I'm like, if I had enough money that I could outsource my time to people, of course, buying a house would be intelligent. But right now, I'm like, I don't know if that would be an intelligent move for me, because my time is super valuable,
You never get any back.
Yeah.
Right. And,
right.
and I think that ties into the whole, self-care and take care of yourself thing, like trying to do everything that could be rooted in some fear or something else, or so taking care of yourself, that would be something that I would tell myself to, be careful. Yeah. Guard your time and use it wisely, and don't be afraid to reach out for help. Because like you said before about it taking a village, right? Like everyone's trying to do everything themselves. It's just, we see the people who are most successful, they have a good read on what they can outsource and what they can do.
That's kind of where I'm at right now in my life. I'm like, okay, it's time to start outsourcing what I do, because like I do this podcast and I'm like, I record it, I edit it, I advertise it. I feel like nowadays I'm more a professional marketing person. Like, what do you call those people? I'm a more successful marketing person than I am a musician, like, because I have to put so much time into like the social media thing. And I'm like, we've reached that time where I need assistance. I need someone to help me edit these things, like a tech assistant, and I need like a social media assistant, and I need maybe a booking agent too for gigs, because that's another thing. I don't know if you've ever had to sit there and like write emails, like call places for gigs. That's a whole nother time thing too,
and I think, like, man, it's in some ways it's so much easier now. Like when my band was first starting to try to get gigs, we had to get like the Village Voice or the Aquarium Weekly and look for every phone number we could find and call, and hopefully they'll call us back. And most places didn't. They're like, we're a new band, we want a gig. How many people can you bring? I don't know yet. And they're like, send us a tape, or show up on Sunday and play for free and see how many people come. And it was like, then we're like hand drawing physical mailers, like we're playing in CBGB, like cutting up the mailer and like writing addresses. And it was like the real grassroots bootstrapping kind of thing. And now you're like, oh man, I don't want to send an email. It's like so much.
But no, you're right. No, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Continue.
No, it's just that. Again, I don't mean to sound like all in my day, but it's just I saw the change. We're like, oh, we saw when bands started getting websites. We had, when CD Baby was originally a place where you bought CDs, and that was, and we saw these companies come and go. We saw the iPod come, and you saw like, we were spiraling, had a lot of friends on MySpace, a lot, and then the MySpace just went, so it was something to be gathering your own tribe to yourself, so you don't lose them. But yeah, there is that thing of wearing so many hats that can be tricky, because those assistants, those people that you want to get to your team, they're going to say, well, why should we work with you? What do you got for us? And it's either like you got a lot of money, or your star is rising, and
or you might get yourself into a Selena situation. What happened to Selena? She had like the lady who was like the fan club manager. Yeah, she I think she embezzled, like she stole, I don't know if embezzled is the right term. I'm not sure what that term like technically means, but she stole money from the company. They found out she was stealing money, and then I think she killed, like that's why she killed Selena. So, I mean, that's an extreme example, but you might get yourself into a situation where you hire an assistant and they're like low key stealing a little bit of money slowly and you don't realize it. Like, so that's the other thing too, of like getting a team, is the trust thing. But no, like what you said about the emails, I'm like, you're right. Yeah, I have to email 15 people a day, but it's as easy as copy and paste, like copy, paste, send, copy, paste, send. Like, so while I am wearing many hats, it probably is a lot easier for me to wear many hats now than it was back in the day.
Sure. And it's like, and then you wake up one day and they're like, everything's different now. People want this. It's all TikTok now or something, it's like, just like the tastes of what's hot and what people are paying attention to. And everyone's trying to figure out like, what's the strategy and it's constantly evolving.
Yeah, no, TikTok. I'm sure I could have much more success on TikTok, but I can't get into it. Like, I'm just like, there's certain things where I'm like, if I'm going to do TikTok, it's definitely an assistant's going to be doing that because I have no interest in that. I don't know if you're into TikTok.
Well, no, I mean, I've made like a couple of videos, and you're right. Like, I wasn't like, maybe I'll leave this one alone. I'm for the older demographic. I don't know if this is really viable. But then last year, I think it was, at one point, my messages started blowing up. Everyone's like, you got to see this thing on TikTok. And I was like, what's going on here? And it was a comedian, musician guy. And the premise of the video, and it said, like, being a keyboardist for Kansas must be a really boring job. And he's playing Wayward Son, and he's just going, meh. Because it has these really pronounced organ stabs in it. And I'm thinking there's a lot more in that song. But he's eating like a bag of Doritos, and in between times he put his hand on the keyboard. They're like, are you mad? I'm like, this is hilarious. But I have to respond.
I wonder how he felt about that response. I wonder if he was like, oh shit. Or if
we've communicated. I've invited him to shows and stuff. He's like, I was just kidding, because some people got mad. I wasn't mad. But my response was, hey, sort of like a, hey, school's in session, buddy. And then I just put it, I said that, and then showed a video of me just tearing up some impossible thing on the Kansas concert. Like, in other words, there's a lot more to being the keyboardist for Kansas than you think. And it was done in good humor. And the other thing was that, but I just found it so bizarre that his joke, the premise of his joke involved the job that one person in the world has. Me. So it's like, oh, I have to respond to this. Like,
yeah,
it wasn't like being a carpenter must be whatever. It was like so specific. So, and then the guys in the band started putting Doritos on my riser, like during the show. So
no, I remember that. I remember seeing you post it because you shared it on Instagram as well. And I remember I shared it on my story because I thought that was like so badass that you responded to that. But I also didn't realize it was like a friendly banter. I thought you were like really pissed off. Yeah.
Well, it's like, yeah, because people I know were like, I've never seen you throw shade before. And I was like, yeah, it was a little bit of a gentle dunking, but it was like more like hey buddy, we strap on, we gotta go.
Yeah, no, it was cool, and it was also informative because like maybe you broke a stereotype as well. Like maybe people believed that other TikTok video, and then you were able to like break the stereotype of that.
Like defending my honor at the same time, busting into him.
All right, so we're going to end the podcast there. I really enjoyed this episode. Before the podcast ends, is there anything you want to tell the audience? Like, are you touring anywhere in New Jersey, New York, Philly, like those types of areas that you want to share with the listeners?
Yes, Kansas. We are on the 50th anniversary tour, as you mentioned, and that's going well into this year, into 2024, and locally. For those in New Jersey, April 26th, we're at the Mayo Performing Arts Center in Morristown. And April 27th, we're in Lancaster, Pennsylvania at the American Music Hall. It's not exactly Philly. It's a bit of a drive. And that one might be sold out. So check out the ticket scene at kansasband.com. And then my website is tombrislin.com. And this conversation has reminded me that I really need to update it. But you can find me at Tom Brislin. That's 2 I's, no E's. Instagram, at Tom Brislin Music on Facebook, and here on YouTube, I have a couple things. So yeah, stay in touch, and everybody can reach out whenever they want.
Yep. And I'll include a link to, I'm an Instagram person, so I'll include a link to his Instagram below, and I'm sure you can find ways to any of the other things he talked about through that. And that's it. Pranzata Podcast, episode 110. Reminder, if you enjoyed what you heard today, please don't forget to hit subscribe to help me grow this channel and reach my first 1,000 subscribers on this channel. I'm very close. I'm like 900 now. So hitting the sub button is really going to help me a lot. And comment on anything we talked about. I want to hear the input of the listeners as well. I want this to be a community podcast, where we speak back and forth. And that's it. Pranzata Podcast, episode 110. Have a good day, guys. Bye.